Well, continuing with our coverage on the conflict in the Middle East, we're going to be joined via Teams by National Spokesperson of the South African Zionist Federation, Rolene Marks. She joins us live from Modin, Israel. Rolene, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon.
Rolene, if you can hear me, it seems that your connection is a little bit unstable. We're obviously just looking at the developments unfolding and getting perspectives coming in at this hour. We heard from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who has now condemned the instruction that in 24 hours, 1 million people must move. And so in your view, as we're speaking, why is Israel insisting that Palestinians move from their land and houses?
Well, first of all, Israel is showing its humanitarian side, unlike Hamas, who gave no warning to Israeli civilians, including babies, the elderly, the disabled last week when they invaded peaceful southern communities, kibbutzim, a peace concert, a peace rave in the middle of the desert, and mowed down everybody in their sight. We've all seen the footage. The entire international community condemns this, is appalled by it, is horrified by it. And I would remind South Africa, because I've just heard Cyril Ramaphosa and the Lady Pandor, that South Africa stands with the pariah states. That is their position. Israel is giving Palestinians warning to save their lives. We are working with the United States and Egypt to secure a humanitarian corridor that is more than it is required of us under international law. The onus is on Hamas, an internationally prescribed terror organization who uses its human civilians or civilian population as human shields, as they are now with Israelis and foreign nationals that they have taken hostage, including South Africans. I would call on all good South Africans with a good conscience, with a sense of humanity, to condemn last week's massacre. There is no justification for this, no moral equivalence for this. It is absolutely appalling. Israel has to do what Israel has to do and fight a war to root out Hamas, root, stem, and head, so that the Palestinian people in Gaza and that Israelis have a better future. This is supported by all Western countries, including countries in Africa who have roundly condemned last week's terror attack.
Rolene, you're alluding to playing fair in terms of international law, and some are concerned that 24 hours to evacuate 1.1 million people is a tall ask, and that is why there are concerns. I wonder if we could also look at the stance from the World Health Organization. They've decried the humanitarian crisis, which has now mostly affected women. It's mostly also affected children and even healthcare workers. From your vantage point, help us how you're making sense of those scenarios coming to the fore.
I think this is a question better asked of the Egyptians and the Arab world, who have not let in any Palestinians trying to flee. We are trying to establish a humanitarian corridor so that we can let in medicines and food. You know, we have to remember that Egypt shares a border with Gaza. Egypt also has a blockade on Gaza, and the onus shouldn't only be on Israel, but the international community as well to help. And I also want to talk about the situation for women. Last week, women and babies were systematically slaughtered, beheaded, raped, and tortured. We had Hamas footage, which they have proudly shared across their media, of ambulances being struck by their drones and RPG. What you should be calling for, what the World Health Organization should be calling for, and what the international community should be calling for, is the immediate release of all Israelis and foreign nationals being held hostage. They also have immediate health needs.
Which is, you know, sentiments that justify from your vantage point. On the other side, obviously, everyone is...
Not from my vantage point,
as a
from
Zionist,
anyone with a sense of humanity.
Rolene, allow me to speak as I've allowed you to speak. It is from the Zionist perspective. Some are also obviously countering that
it's
given...
not from the Zionist perspective.
Rolene, if you interrupt me
UN
again...
perspective and
Rolene,
from the Western world and the entire world calling for the immediate release of our hostages from a terror organization.
Rolene, if you don't allow me to speak, I'm actually going to have to cut this conversation because we're trying to understand from your vantage point. We've seen the continued oppressive occupation, the system governing Palestine for over 15 years. We've seen it dating back to 1967. So before you interrupt, allow me to speak. I actually now want to get into the reality of a solution on the cards and what a one-state solution is possibly looking like at this point. Is there a will from the people to implement a truce of a sort? Help us understand that. Let's navigate a way forward.
Let's remember that in 2005, Israel withdrew unilaterally from Gaza, including our dead, leaving it under the governorship of Hamas. How do you negotiate with a terror organization whose very genocidal charter calls for the annihilation of the Jewish state? We saw that in action last week. There is no such thing as a one-state solution here. We know what would happen if there was a one-state solution. Israelis would like a peaceful solution so that we are left alone, where there is a state for the Palestinians and a state for the Israelis. It is clear we need as amicable as possible a divorce from each other. There is no conversation to be held with an internationally prescribed terror organization. As we speak, we have a massive US warship off our shores to support Israel's war against Hamas, and we have support coming from other countries. That should give you a clear indication of how the world sees Hamas. The question that South Africa has to ask itself, are we going to side with the rest of the world? And if we really and truly care for the Palestinians, because Israelis do care for the Palestinians, we are angry. You can hear it in my voice. We are frustrated that Hamas has invited a war on both our populations. But South Africans with a sincere and genuine care for a solution for both Palestinians and Israelis, because we exist too, would call for the eradication of a terror organization like Hamas, and a move towards a future where Israelis and Palestinians could each have a state of their own. Because clearly, both people have a right to national aspirations and statehood.
Rolene, thank you for those sentiments. We'll leave the conversation there. Rolene Marks obviously came to respond. She didn't come to engage in a discussion. So we'll leave that conversation there for now. Joining us live from Modding, Israel, she represents the Zionist Federation, the spokesperson of South African Zionist Federation.